Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this ELF event, the launch of the book, The Importance of Open Borders. Here to introduce the topic and to tell us a bit more about the book itself is a member of the board for ELF, European Liberal Forum, Mats Löfström. He's the treasurer of the board. He is also a member of parliament in Finland for the Åland Islands. Mats, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ted, and also on behalf of European Liberal Forum, I would like to welcome everybody to this seminar and the launch of the publication. Some of you have probably been involved with European Liberal Forum ELF a lot, but some of you might never have heard about the organization before. It is a liberal think tank, a political foundation based in Brussels, consisting of 47 member organizations spread out over Europe. We have a secretariat of about 15 employees in Brussels, and we are affiliated with the ALDE party, the Liberal European Party, on the EU level. It's a fantastic pleasure to be here launching this publication now in a new phase of the COVID pandemic, the importance of open borders. And I would like to stress on three things to start with before we continue with the rest of the program here. First of all, free movement of products and people, goods, cargo. It's a cornerstone of the European Union. And we can see during the pandemic that didn't work. So we have to draw conclusions on a European level of how to deal with future pandemics and other shocks to the core fundamentals of the European Union. Secondly, this is extremely topical, this publication. Last week, the Nordic countries gathered in Copenhagen for the annual Nordic Council Summit. And during that summit, also the Nordic Prime Ministers received a draft report and a presentation of how the borders and the border cooperation worked during the pandemic within the Nordic countries that are even more familiar and used to open borders, not only in Schengen, but well ahead of that, the passport-free union that we have had between the Nordic countries since the 50s. So it's extremely topical, and that report will be launched at a later stage this autumn, so to discuss this. And thirdly, and to say unfortunately, we are seeing signs in Europe of a bit of a backlash in the pandemic, that infections are spreading again, which was expected. But when infections are spreading, hospital numbers are going up, despite the fact that more people are vaccinated, but not everyone. You see the pressure growing on politicians. In Denmark, for example, now it's a debate of while to reintroduce corona vaccination passports, and we will certainly have a debate also about the borders. And therefore, I think this publication is very good to have at this stage, bringing it forward where we not put borders as a silver bullet for fighting the pandemic, but rather we need to strike the right balance of fighting the pandemic with vaccinations, with other measures, and at the same time keeping the borders open, which is crucial for the labor market, but also, especially from a member of parliament from a border region, it's extremely important to have the border regions open for families, for students, for relatives, and of course labor and people going to work in another in the neighboring country to access that labor market. But with those words, also on behalf of ELF, I would like to welcome everybody to this seminar. I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mats. One of the fundaments in the European Union is the free movement of goods and people, and that is maybe one of the key factors that we started thinking about when we started this report, started working on this report in the summer of 2020, when we were in the midst of the pandemic. We have a focus on the individual, and we wanted to see how the individual is affected. And of course, apart from contacting several authors and experts around 5 different countries, we also talked to certain individuals, certain individual citizens, to see, as a part of this project, to see how the pandemic affected their lives. And we're going to see a short story at this point of 2 of these people. The question is, how do you choose whether to stay or go when the border closes? Ludmila had just landed her dream job at a new restaurant in Warsaw when the pandemic hit and the borders were closed. At the same time, her mother in the Ukraine got seriously ill. She and her friend Arsen, who had to choose whether to stay in Poland or go back to Ukraine in a situation where nobody knew when travel would be allowed again. Arsen and Ludmila have asked us not to use their surnames. This is the story of Ukrainian Ludmila and her friend Arsen.
Сначала я думал ехать домой. Там первая неделя, вторая я думал ехать домой. Но потом по двух неделях я уже передумал и остался здесь. Ну, потому что как-то уже не помню уже, не помню свою... Почему это случилось? Ну, сначала я хотел ехать, да, там первую неделю. Потому что боялся, что закроют границы, и я там останусь навсегда.
Це був такий новий ресторан, який надіявся на хороше якби відкриття, але пандемія, власне, то все зруйнувала, тому що ми закрилися і сама ситуація ковіду з часом закрила взагалі той ресторан.
Ну, за короткий період часу я б не зміг повернутися. Тобто там за 2 тижні чи за 3, певно, я б не зміг повернутися. І так, були б ну, не проблеми, але потрібно довше було чекати, так, на візу або на відкриття візи.
Ситуація з границями для нас поза Євросоюзу і так являється не найліпшою для швидкого перетину, але пандемія спровокувала то ще більшу блокаду. На деякий час взагалі були границі закриті, і щоб поїхати до своєї родини, а тим паче, якщо в моїй ситуації, коли була хвора мама, ну це виглядало дуже катастрофічно. Ситуація виглядала так, що я трималася, наскільки могла протриматися, тому що, єднак, я потребувала трошечки таких... Не укриваємо, що трошечки наші фінансові заробки в Польщі є трошки ліпші, ніж на Україні. Тому я, хоч за обнижену ставку, але осталася в цій країні, так як зі мною тут є дочка. Вже під час другої фалі були границі і закриті, і відкриті, але я якраз потрапила в ту мить, коли вони трохи функціонували.
Ні, я вже не працюю на в тому ресторані, так я вже не працюю. На жаль, то місце роботи не було з найкращих, так, тому що всі працівники втратили роботу, і я 3 місяці був взагалі без роботи, не працював.
Повернутися, звісно, я повинна була повернутися, тому що, так як говорила раніше, що зі мною тут дочка проживала, а я у зв'язку з хворобою мами поїхала просто додому. Повинна була повернутися, але повернулася за 3 місяці. Наш ресторан, в якому я почала працювати в 2019 році у зв'язку з коронавірусом, закрився, на жаль. І на сьогоднішній день я працюю в іншому місці.
Touching stories on how the pandemic affected the individual, because at the end of the day, that's all we are. We're all individuals and we are all affected in different ways. At this point, we're going to move on to the panel discussion section of this event, and I would like to introduce our 3 panelists. We have Mats Löfström, who you already met. Mats has been a member of the Finnish Parliament since 2015, representing the Åland Islands. He is the first vice chairman of the liberal Swedish parliamentary group and a member of the Parliament's Constitutional Law Committee, Interior Committee, EU Affairs Committee, and a substitute member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And since 2020, he's also been a board member and treasurer of ELF. I'm really glad you had the time to come and visit us here. On the panel via Zoom is also Laura Danilas from Estonia, who is a member of the Tartu City Council since 2017. And she has a bachelor's in aeronautical engineering from the Estonian Aviation Academy, but is currently working as an advisor to the Minister of Social Protection in Estonia. And we also have Magdalena M. Kai, who is a political scientist by education, who has worked many years in the non-governmental sector in Poland and in the UK, specializing in projects on international volunteering and delivering training to youth workers on topics such as human rights, minority rights, interreligious dialogue, and combating hate speech. We also have a few of the other authors with us today, and I will present them at a later stage. Magdalena, I would like to ask you to start, having seen this video, and it is also a topic that you touch upon in your text, the fact that there are a lot of Ukrainians working in the Polish service sector. What sort of feelings do you get from the video?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be the author of the publication, but also for today's discussion. Good morning to everyone, and I wish I would be looking as fresh as you are in the studio. So thank you for that. Thank you for this. But I just wanted to put one disclaimer. It's 8 a.m. in Poland. And yes, as you mentioned, I was focusing on the situation, on how the pandemic has influenced the labor market in Poland, especially with the focus on the migration workers. And as it was mentioned in the video, as you could see, the 2 people who are giving the interview were both Ukrainians, both working in the sectors, in the servicing sector. And their stories about coming to Poland looking for a better future, because end of the day, that's what we are doing when choosing to leave our country. It's the same situation that Poles did towards the end of the communism era and the beginning of capitalism. They were moving to, for example, Germany, and were doing the same jobs as Ukrainians are doing right now in Poland, which is mainly working in the services. Hence, I have the feeling that even though, especially now with the government that we have been having for last 6 years, there is a general idea that Polish society is being not very tolerant towards the migration labor. However, from my observation living in Warsaw, this is not the case. And one thing is that really we have quite, as I wrote in my text, we have over 1 million Ukrainians working in Poland. Majority of them is working legally in Poland, which is also, in my opinion, a very important factor to emphasize. And yes, the pandemic has hit them very hard in a way that from one day to another, they have lost their source of income, because it also has to be remembered that in the servicing sector, working in a restaurant or providing cleaning services, most of the time you will not get a job contract. A job contract which is set for a certain period of time, but when you decide to work in a restaurant as a waitress, as a cook, whatever, then you can work on one day, and on the second day you don't have a job. That's why it's very important to understand that people who decide to come to Poland or whichever other European Union country, and who are willing to to take on such jobs as waitress, working in restaurants, etc., they must be, how you want to call it, I don't want to say desperate, but determined to change their lives. And most probably they have exhausted the possibilities of better their lives in their home countries. That's why we all get this emotional feeling when both reading the stories and testimonies of people who came for a better life, and the pandemic, which is something that nobody could predict, maybe apart from the conspiracy theorists, but I won't deal with them. So that's why, for me, it's worth to remember that those people came here to look for a better life, and their life has been changed dramatically in a split second without them having to say anything about this. But on the other hand, and I also touched upon this in my text, I would like to emphasize that the notion that we have migrants coming from the eastern border to Poland or further to the European Union, that those are only less qualified workers who are coming to do the most easiest jobs that Poles or members of the European Union doesn't want to do. This is also not true, because it has to be emphasized that that migration is also of highly skilled and educated workers who are coming to Poland and who are competing on the labor market, let's say with Polish workers. And I have this situation in my work. I work in one of the big four companies, and we have many colleagues coming from Ukraine or Belarus who are our peers, and we are not able to tell the difference between our qualification, competences, etc. So that part of the migration, thanks to flexible working options, hybrid working model, or working at home, this part of the migration was, let's say, safe as the companies were. However, the real issue and the real problem was with people who left everything at their homes, like the persons who were interviewed, who left their sick parents, who came to Poland as sort of a last resort and were hit with the pandemic as something, again, that nobody could predict. And in my opinion, this is the biggest tragical aspect of the pandemic.
Thank you, Magda. Laura, how about you? You also raised the issue in your chapter that Ukrainians make a large part of or that Estonian labor needs Ukrainian labor force as well. How would you like to comment this video and the things that we heard there?
Hello, everybody, and thanks for having me today. Yeah, the situation was quite bad, and actually it is still quite bad, because we all know that the situation haven't changed that much as we wanted. But to talk about the Ukrainians in Estonia, it's I have to emphasize that Ukrainians are very needed in Estonia because I also wrote in my article that, for example, Estonian agriculture sector, in the sector we have mainly Ukrainians working because, for example, if we talk about the different kind of works, which needs to be done in the sector, they are mainly done by Ukrainians. Actually, what was also mentioned in this video is that there is a difference if we talk about labor inside, like labor movement inside EU or outside EU. So in terms of Ukrainians, it's much more complicated because Ukraine is not a part of the EU. So that's a little bit more difficult, I would say. And also, I actually read Magdalena's article as well, and she pointed out that and there is also difference if we talk about, for example, services or we talk about, for example, IT sector. And as you might know, Estonia is one of the most popular IT countries. So we have many Ukrainians working in the agriculture sector, but also in IT companies. So the difference is actually, if we compare two sectors, we see that in IT sector we can have remote work, but for example, if you talk about agriculture, it's impossible to do remote work. So yeah, the situation was especially difficult for us because at this time we had the far-right party in the Estonian government, and Ukrainians were not very welcome here because they had this kind of attitude that we can do everything by ourselves and we don't need any labor from Ukraine or other countries. So that was really difficult for us as well. In the summer, I visited one of the farms and asked how is the situation right now? Has it changed? Has it got better? And I got the answer that the situation is still very difficult because Estonians do not want to do this kind of jobs they offer in the sector, in the agriculture sector. But Ukrainians really want to have this kind of jobs because we all know that the salaries are here better, and they feel that this work is fine for them. So there are so many difficult questions and different aspects to discuss, but these are, I think, the most of the important ones.
Thank you, Laura. When editing and working on this report, one of the things I noticed was that there are two sort of main lines in all of the texts. We have 10 authors from 5 different European countries, and one of the aspects was the issue of for instance, the Ukrainian migrant workers and the need for migrant workers, because your own population doesn't really want to do the heavy lifting. You'd rather go somewhere else to do it. And the other one is the issue of the border, and we will get to the sort of the cooperation across borders at a slightly later stage. At this point, I would also like to introduce Caspian Rebinder, who is the head of labor market policy at the Swedish free market think tank Timbro. He has a Master of Science in Political Science from Stockholm University and has previously worked as a political advisor at the Swedish Parliament. Caspian, you also wrote in your text about all the rottening lingonberry in the Swedish forests because there are no people to pick them. Would you like to elaborate a bit, please?
Yes, absolutely. So the main point of my text is similar to the point that Magdalena and Laura makes. Labor migration is needed and foreign labor is needed for many sectors in the economy. And so stopping labor migration hurts the economy. That's the gist of it. It's a simple point to make, but I really dig into one or a few a few points that are a little bit trickier. Some people might say that maybe in the short run, but does it really hurt the economy if foreign labor doesn't come and take our jobs? Doesn't it just mean that the jobs that foreigners do, for example, in Sweden, many people come from Thailand and other countries to pick berries in the Swedish forests. So many people, politicians, not least in the Social Democrats, but also in many other parties, argue that it's a good thing to stop this immigration because then the jobs could go to those who need it more, that is unemployed people who are already in Sweden, both of Swedish origin and immigrants who came for like a few years ago and haven't got employment yet. So why should new immigrants come to take these jobs? I call it the they took our jobs theory, inspired by the famous South Park episode. So that is a relevant question, and that is a legitimate question. But what I do is also I look at the research on it, and I look at how labor markets work, and I look at a little statistics and find and can argue that no, immigration doesn't hurt the economy. Immigration doesn't take jobs from native people. It's quite the opposite. Research done on Swedish labor migration shows that firms that can employ labor migrants actually increase their employment more than firms than similar firms that do not employ labor migrants. And one case study that I delve into in this chapter is the case of berry pickers. Because there's been some to and from and hard to measure the European movement during the pandemic. It has, of course, gone down significantly, but it's been still fairly easy to move between European countries, not least in the Nordic area. However, we saw an incredibly sharp reduction of third country nationals coming to work in Sweden, not least in the berry picking sector. So I look at the berry picking sector and see what happened when people could not come from Thailand, especially Thailand. There are, I think Thailand is around 90% of berry pickers in Sweden. They come usually as seasonal workers for around 2 months. And this year they came almost not at all, or at least with an incredibly significant reduction in numbers. So what happened? Did the youth unemployment go down in Sweden because people went into the forest and picking berries? Not at all. What happened instead was, as Ted mentioned, the lingonberries and the blueberries and all the berries that these pickers were to pick and to freeze and to sell them and make jam and make juice and everything you can do with the berries. They just stayed in the forest, getting eaten by ants or rotting away or whatever berries do when they stay in the forest. So it was just from an economical perspective, a huge capital loss, so to say, or a huge reduction in productivity. No gains whatsoever. And this is, of course, only one sector, only one brief period of time, only one work on one kind of job. So I guess you could argue how much is this significant for all the economy and all the labor immigration? But the case that I make is that this is a snapshot of how a world without immigration would look like. In many sectors, it would be much harder to fill up the vacancies and to employ the people you need to employ. In many firms, the productivity would go down maybe so much that the firm cannot stay living. Probably the long-term effects would not be any increased or decreased employment, but the productivity would be lower. So all in all, the labor immigration is very good for the economy, very good for the labor market. And the reduction of labor immigration during the COVID pandemic, not least in the berry picking sector in Sweden, is a prime example of what happens when we try to stop it. So no, they don't take our jobs, they increase our economy. Stopping labor migration is generally a very bad idea.
So in fact, the numbers are in stark contrast to the nationalist and populistic rhetoric of the far right, who claim that they come here and they take our jobs and try to keep our borders closed. And that's actually one of the things, one of the ideas behind this report, was to show that we in Europe, in the European Union, that we need to keep our borders open. At this point, I would like to introduce our Austrian author, Günther Oswald, who works as an economic policy advisor to the liberal Austrian party NEOS and their think tank NEOS Lab. Günther has previously been a journalist for 20 years, primarily for the daily newspaper Der Standard, where he was, among other things, managing editor and deputy head of economics. Günther, in your chapter, you don't talk that much about berries in the woods or agriculture sector, but what you raise is the nursing and care service sector and how dependent that is on a migrant labor force in Austria. Would you like to open up this for us a bit, this topic? If you're with us, Günther. I saw you earlier here at least. Okay, so this is this is something that happens in the modern world. Günther is on the subway at the present time, so he wasn't prepared to speak. No worries. Let's move on to. I can read a chapter that Günther wrote in his sector. In his section, he wrote that. To prevent the collapse of home care, special solutions had to be found quickly. At the end of March 2020, nurses were flown in from Timisoara in Romania and Sofia in Bulgaria on the first charter flight. Austria subsequently concluded agreements with Hungary and Romania to transport nurses into the country on special trains from May onwards. Only slowly did the realization gain acceptance that it is not a nationality of the people that is relevant, but the security concept. There was also a rapid shortage of labor in agriculture. Since there were no harvest workers or butchers, the harvests could not be fully brought in and meat could not be processed, which resulted in a shortage of supplies. At least the adverse conditions under which harvest workers sometimes work became apparent. The learning from this is that the labor markets in the European Union are far too interwoven to allow uncoordinated border closings to be carried out. And this is also something that we talk a lot about in this book, the border closings and how this affected relationships between neighboring governments. And I'm going to move at this point to the Estonian and Finnish situation, which well, it was quite critical, and I would, Laura, like you to start by telling us what it looked like from the Estonian side, and after that, Camila Makinen, who wrote the Finnish chapter, can comment, and then, of course, I'll give the word to Mats. But Laura, could you walk us through what happened in March 2020 between Finland and Estonia?
So as the situation was very difficult everywhere in Estonia and Finland, Finland decided to close the border on March 12, 2020. And that was really shocking for all of Estonians, because what I also covered in my article is that we have many Estonians working and living in Finland, and they are going Finland and coming back, so they are like not living like all the time here, but they are using ferry to visit their families here and so on. The situation we had was so to say, insane because Estonians didn't know what to do. We didn't know that Finland is going to close the border, and the situation was extremely complicated for us. Estonia and Finland have always had like really good relationship. Finland is one of the biggest and most important partners for Estonia, but this time we realized that we cannot have hopes up for Finland anymore, because we felt that we are not like friends anymore, and we have like left behind. We had many families in really difficult situation. For example, talking about people's mental health. It was extremely difficult for all these kind of families whose like father or mother was in Finland, but the other parts of the family were in Estonia. So they were in Finland like many months, and situation, I don't even remember when it was. Like, it was actually in June this year, I think, when it like when they got the chance to have this the opportunity to work in Finland and come back to Tallinn as well. So yeah, the situation was really difficult, and to talk about the diplomatic relationships, as I mentioned, we felt that Finland only had its national interests and didn't care about Estonia anymore and Estonian people who were in Finland at this time. So yeah, I would say that it was really shocking for us, and the Estonian people were quite desperate. But I think we made our conclusions, and now we know better what kind of country Finland is. So yeah, no hopes high for Finland.
Thank you, Laura. We're standing here with our cheeks red. It's not just a lack of makeup in the studio. At this point, I would also like to introduce Camila Makinen, who is a doctoral student at Hanken School of Economics. She actually previously worked as a special advisor to the Finnish Minister of Justice, Anna-Maja Henriksson, on economic issues. Camila, would you like to? You also touch on this subject in your chapter. Would you like to comment and walk us through what happened on the Finnish side of the border? And then, of course, after that, I'll give the floor to Mats Löfström, who is a parliamentarian here in Finland, and talk about this as well. Camila first, unless you're on the subway.
No, I'm actually not. Thank you, Ted. It was Laura had a pretty accurate description of the situation from the Estonian side, and well, to maybe lay out a bit of background from the Finnish side. Finland had quite a strict interpretation of the whole COVID situation from the beginning. And when we could see that actually all the countries around Finland had a worse situation in numbers of infected and so on, both Estonia and Sweden and Russia, of course, but mainly we're talking now about Estonia and Sweden. Finland quite quickly implemented quite harsh border restrictions and similar restrictions for all foreign nationals. There were very few exceptions made with critical workers and so forth. And as Laura said, a lot of the workers in the building industry in Finland are from Estonia and other Baltic countries as well. And when the kind of division into who is a critical laborer and who is not, the building industry was not viewed as that. And I think that when the politicians made the decision in March of 2020 to kind of implement the strict border control, no one knew how long the situation was gonna be. And I think for sure no one realized that it's gonna be restricted for such a long time. As Laura said, the situation went back to somewhat normal this summer. So it was for over a year. And I completely feel for the individuals. It must have been a horrible decision to make, to either stay with your family or then give up your income. And I think that was a kind of maybe a level of the discussion that was not brought up to light on a common level in Finland or to the general public. So yeah, I completely feel for the Estonian people. And I think especially in the spring of 2020, it was not something that was maybe taken into general, as a general point. And then when moving forward in the pandemic, or in regards to the economic, when we're starting to rebuild the economic and we're talking about different stimulations and so forth. We have done a lot of investing into the infrastructure sector and the building sector, and then I think it's very important to see the value that foreign laborers bring to our economy as well, and that's maybe a point that has been missed. And then maybe I would like to say a few words about the diplomatic relations. And I think this might be true for a lot of European countries, that it's not something we've had to actively think about and work on for the past, well, decenniums maybe. And I hope that this pandemic actually will bring us closer to our neighbors. And I hope that the wedge is not too deep. But of course, we can see in a lot of countries that the first few months of the pandemic, a lot of decisions were made solely on the own nation's interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Camilla, for that. Let's go back to Mats. During the pandemic, since it started, you've been very vocal, especially in social media, but also in the press, on the situation, partially between Finland and Sweden, and partially as well on the communication between Finland and Estonia. And just as a background, Mats is a parliamentarian for the Åland Islands, which is a group of islands, an autonomous Finnish region between Finland and Sweden, and it has actually been demilitarized since the 1850s, right? And you have a very special position in Finnish politics in that sense. You are part of Finnish politics, but you can also at times regard it from the outside. Would you like to comment on this whole situation as well?
Absolutely, Ted. Thank you very much, and thank you all speakers for excellent introductions from their perspective. I would say, talking about the economy as a whole, you could really see that some industries were impacted more than others. The berry picking, agriculture, also social homes, homes for elderly people, and last but not least, I mean the construction industry that we heard. from the Estonian Finnish perspective. And during that time in 2020, the Confederation of Building Industry in Finland said that if we will not get Estonian workers to work, all buildings, big buildings in building sites in Helsinki region will stop. So we are so dependent on them. But one must remember that even though it's important for some sectors, as a country as a whole, the main focus will of course be on the labor market that is in the country, but some regions are more important than relying more on immigration and also people living in one country working in another country. And it's not about only low-paying jobs, it's about good-paying jobs. For example, Finnish people working in Swedish nuclear power plants. It's Swedish and Danish pilots flying ambulance helicopters in Finland. There are Swedish people going to Norway. And for example, my region, Åland Islands, even though we are only 0.5% of the Finnish population, 15% of the labor market exchange from Finland is from the Åland Islands. So that really tells you that our region relies a lot of the labor market integration with Sweden. And that is also the case in Lapland, in northern Finland with northern Sweden, or from Sweden to Copenhagen in the south, or between Helsinki in Tallinn. And one must remember those regional perspectives when taking national decisions. But most of all, I think that one must, and going back to the video we saw in the beginning, one must remember that we are all people, we are all human beings, and of course the most severe impact of all the restrictions are felt by the individual. Someone who cannot go to his or her work, someone who cannot go home to see their parents, see their sons or daughters, and for a very long time, and other people that cannot see each other. And I think those are not a majority of the population in any country, but those are people that decision makers also must listen to, because we shouldn't let anyone fall between the shears, as has happened now. And I think we need to draw conclusions from this period, because unfortunately it will probably not be the last pandemic humankind have faced, and also other conflicts could happen. I think some general conclusions we should be able to draw, and I will present three of them in my opinion. And the first of all is the communication with your neighboring countries. I mean, we couldn't wait for a pan-European strategy, and different EU states have different situations. And we see that now also with the vaccination rates, that some countries have a really low pickup in vaccinations. But what we could do is to communicate better. And even though we sometimes need to do national or even regional decisions, we need to tell our partners, our friends about the decisions that we will take. Because if we don't do that, we will break trust. And that is what have happened not only with Estonia from a Finnish perspective, but with other partners too, and other countries with other neighboring countries. And we need to rebuild that trust. We need to be reliable partners. And a starting point is, of course, to inform your embassies, your friends, your minister colleagues about the decisions that you will take. And according to my information, that was not done to Tallinn from a Finnish perspective, even though it was done to Sweden. But that was not, I think, that was rather a coincidence that the ministers were speaking with each other than a plan. But the communication needs to be better. And secondly, we need to coordinate with our partners, neighboring countries, to try to find a common approach, a strategy that works together to keep borders open. But if that is not possible, there should at least be room for some coordination in some fields, in some areas, even though it's gonna, even if it not will be for everyone. And thirdly and lastly, I would stress that also the capitals where the parliaments and where the governments are need to understand their own country better, and that goes both to the labor market to see that some parts of the labor market is really dependent on experts or labor coming from another country, but also that there are some regions that are more impacted of restrictions than others. So our countries are much bigger than the capital regions, and sometimes it has felt that not only the decision making has focused very much on the capital regions and the perspectives, not only in Finland. This is, I think, something also in Sweden, and what we have discussed from the Finnish Constitutional Law Committee with our colleagues in the Swedish Constitutional Law Committee. But that has, as Camila stressed, some of those cases were not brought up in the general debate because also media didn't highlight the situation outside of the capital regions and how some border communities were impacted. And my border community was impacted severely, and also Lapland, also the Tallinn communication. So there were several regions, also Vaasa, Umeå in a Finnish context was impacted of this. And you could easily see that there should have been room to make tailor-made solutions for those regions without jeopardizing the whole national strategy to combat the pandemic. And we need to be more humble, I think, listening to other parts of our own countries, but also humble with our long-time friends across the sea in a Finnish perspective, but also across the border in a European context with our neighboring countries, because otherwise we will break trust, and that is something we cannot afford of in the long term, and that needs to be rebuilt now.
Thank you, Mats. We have a few minutes left, and I would at this point like to open the floor for any questions or comments from the audience. Please raise your hand. I'm looking at the screen right now. I see we have a lot of participants. If you have a question, if you have a comment, please speak your mind now, or otherwise I'll continue. Any questions? Any takers? Nothing that I can see on the screen. Oh, Karin.
Yes, hello. My name is Karin Karlsson, and I'm a reporter at the Ålandic newspaper Nya Åland. And we have focused our reporting on the Åland Islands and Finland, but I would like to share with our readers a more broad perspective and have some questions, especially to the Estonian representative. You were quite critical in your presentation against Finland. I would like you to elaborate what Finland could have done better in this situation, in your perspective.
Thank you very much for the question. I think actually Mats brought out very well what Finland could have done better. Communication and cooperation between Finland and Estonia could have definitely be better. Also, I was actually critical, yes, I know, but I would like to say that we see the situation right now, and we have actually understood why you choose to use this kind of harsh measures. Because, for example, if we look at the situation right now, in terms of people who are infected, we see that your approach has actually worked. Because we all know that Estonia, restrictions in Estonia right now and before were not the same as in Finland. And now we see that that's the reason why you actually closed the borders and why you didn't let Estonian people do that you travel between Estonia and Finland. So yeah, that's what I can say. So we can actually only learn from Finland in this case. So yeah, first we were critical and we were very desperate, but now we see that the situation, like the decisions you made, were actually really good ones.
Thank you, Laura. Did that answer your question, or would you like further comments as well?
Yes, it did, but I have a follow-up question on that. I would just like to know if you have any, can paint me a picture about what the Estonians think about Finland and how the general Estonian perspective of Finland has changed because of this.
That's a good question. I think it has changed. Not a lot, but a bit, definitely, because we saw how you acted in this situation. But I personally think that we still have a good relationship between Estonia and Finland, because as I also mentioned, Finland is one of the most important partners for Estonia. So yeah, I think it has changed a bit in terms of trust, but still, you are really good friends of us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for.
Thank you. At this point, it would have been great if we would have had Queen's "Friends Will Be Friends" for a finishing touch and to end the soundtrack. It is now 2 minutes to 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. here in Helsinki, 2 minutes to 9 a.m. in the rest of Europe. I think at this point, unless there are any further questions, please raise your hand if you have any further questions or comments. Otherwise, I think it's time for us to wrap up. As you can see, this report, this book, may I borrow this? Oh. Yep. Without your phone, sorry. This book is full of interesting stories, comments, numbers, thoughts, and I strongly recommend that you take a look at it. You can find it online, for instance, at the website importanceof.eu, the importance of EU, or you can just Google it, the importance of open borders. Thank you so much for participating. Thank you, Mats. Thank you, Camilla. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Caspian. Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you, Günther. I hope you got to where you were going. And thank you, of course, to the European Liberal Forum for making this happen. Have a really great day, and I hope to see you soon in these similar settings.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.